meeting of the Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools Board of Education will come to order. The chair requests a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
So moved. Second.
Chair requests a motion to move into closed session for the reasons stated on the agenda. I repeated it because my microphone wasn't on.
Thanks.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing nothing. We will return from closed session tonight probably as close as possible to 6:30 p.m. We're running way ahead of schedule tonight. We'll accommodate public comment at 7 if people come at that time. Thank you. The meeting is now back in open session, and there is no personnel report tonight, so that takes us to public comments section of the agenda. I want to go ahead and read our preface statement about public comment and explain the process, and then we'll get into that. The board recognizes the vital importance of listening to varied points of view on programs and issues facing the Board of Education or the school system, and encourages public comment about educational issues. When recognized, please state your name, and if you're speaking for an organization, the name and identity of the organization. Speakers are reminded that neither personal attacks nor obscene, abusive, or defamatory language is permitted. Board members may ask clarifying questions, but will not engage in dialogue with the speaker or the public. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to present comments. The remaining time is indicated on the tablet clock in front of Ms. Jenkins, right here to my right. When out of time, please conclude your remarks. To begin, we recognize school improvement team representatives, teacher organizations, and/or high school student government representatives, followed by general public comment. Are there any representatives of these groups? And if so, please come forward. Mr. Link, good evening.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Board, Superintendent Hamlet. My name is Brian Link, and I'm the President of the Chapel Hill Carver Association of Educators. When we saw each other last Thursday, thank you. When we saw each other last Thursday, I said I would reserve judgment on Tier 3 because we had not had an opportunity to go through that. I'm here tonight to speak on particularly the Tier 3 cuts. Education is a people business. We know this every day in the classroom, right? Our first priority is the people, the kids that we're here to serve the public for. In turn, right, it is the job of this board and this administration to serve the people who help kids. I want to be clear for all in the audience, right, that we do understand that we're down 1,000 in enrollment, and that's $8.5 million. We do understand that there were promises made by the county commission to fund shortfalls, and unfortunately those haven't come through. But this is a people business. There are lots of wonderful people who are sitting in the audience tonight who are affected, and more who are affected at home. And what we would like to ask as an organization is to be able to say that the plan that has come up with is thoughtful in many ways, right? By not making those cuts immediately, to have until the end of the year, right, to look for potential alternatives. But we would like to ask, right, for this board to think differently and to perhaps go a little bit further. And again, in a collaborative partnership with the administration. And what we mean by this is I'd like to just provide a contrast. In your consent agenda this evening, you have approximately $500,000 or 10% of the amount of cuts that you're looking at tonight in contracted services. What we would like to ask is going forward is to work collaboratively with the administration to do a thorough review of where we are spending not on people, but on products. And to be able to say, we're not naive. We know we're not going to be able to come up with the full $5 million that is needed to replenish, right, our fund balance. But to be able to look thoughtfully and carefully and to say, is it going to be a product that is going to most help kids, right, a software program, or is it going to be an ITF? Is it going to be a product, or is it going to be a coach? Is it going to be a product, or is it going to be an assistant principal? And we think that by working together, that we're going to be able to come to a solution that certainly won't solve all of the problems that we're facing because of these larger structural issues that we mentioned. But we can guarantee to all the people who have gotten the news over the last week that we have done our very best to protect people who every day are looking out for, protecting, and making progress with our kids. Thank you very much.
Anybody else from any other groups? Okay, then next we'll call individual speakers to come forward to the podium. And when you're recognized tonight, again, please state your name. And if you are speaking for an organization, the name and identity of the organization. And Ms. Wallington, how many speakers have signed up? 4. 4? And is this going to be the order, one name at a time you're going to put up? Okay. And so is that Yancey Sam or Sam Yancey? Sam Yancey, please come forward.
Thank you. My name is Sam Yancey. I am an ITF, an Instructional Technology Facilitator at Glenwood Elementary School, and I'm here on behalf of the ITFs in the district and other concerned staff members. We, the Instructional and Technology Facilitators, dear respected members of the Board of Education, we are deeply concerned about the district's proposal to eliminate 8 of the 18 ITF positions. While we recognize the financial challenges this district faces, this decision directly conflicts with the board's commitment to enhancing student learning and teacher capacity through instructional technology. The board has invested over $7 million in technology hardware in the past 2 years, with more funding to be allocated. However, these investments will be highly underutilized without full-time ITFs at each school, who ensure that instructional technology is effectively integrated into the classrooms at each unique site. ITFs provide essential training, leadership, and support, transforming these tools from mere devices into powerful educational assets. Eliminating ITF positions will severely undermine the goals we've set for improving educational outcomes through instructional technology. ITFs bridge the gap between instructional technology and pedagogy, ensuring that digital tools enrich instruction rather than hinder it. They work closely with teachers to build confidence in using new technologies and guide students in developing digital literacy skills crucial for their future success. The daily ongoing presence of ITFs fosters a culture of support and collaboration in each of our individual schools. Overall, this powerful instructional support with technology ignites educators and empowers students in full alignment with our CHCCS core values of engagement, joy, and wellness. We have seen the detrimental effects of spreading ITFs too thin in the past. Between 2010 and 2012, a pilot program in the district that assigned one ITF to 2 schools proved ineffective. The lack of daily presence and personalized support hindered technology integration and collaboration. Repeating this mistake on a larger scale will likely lead to significant negative impacts on personalized support, teacher confidence, and student learning outcomes. The timing and process of this proposed reduction is troubling. The district has missed the opportunity to address staffing challenges through attrition rather than sudden elimination of roles. Moreover, the selection process lacks input from key stakeholders such as principals and directors, raising concerns about fairness and effectiveness. We urge the board to reconsider this proposal. Maintaining one ITF at each school is crucial for preserving the quality of education and technology integration our district is known for. This decision is about maintaining our commitment to instructional excellence, even in difficult times. It is about pursuing once more what is best for our students in our CHCCS schools. Cutting these positions will be a dire step backward, jeopardizing the progress and investment we've made, and disrupt the future success of our CHCCS students. Thank you for your time and consideration. This is a condensed version of a letter that was sent to board members and that was signed by ITFs and concerned educators from our school. Thank you.
Can you all hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Shri Sankar, and I was hired as a math coach at McDougall Middle School just over a month ago. And I'm here representing all the secondary math and literacy coaches. Dear members of the Board of Education, we are sharing our concerns about the proposed elimination of instructional coach positions across our district. While we understand the need for budgetary adjustments, removing instructional coaches conflicts with the board's commitment to instructional excellence. The coaches who are currently supporting literacy and math at each school are crucial for enhancing teaching practices and ensuring high-quality instruction and directly impacting student achievement. Instructional coaches provide essential support by guiding teachers, implementing best practices, and fostering a collaborative environment in each school. Their absence would significantly diminish support for teachers and negatively affect student and teacher performance within each school. The decision-making process has raised some concerns due to its rapid nature and lack of input from key stakeholders. It is vital that those involved in supporting instructional quality have a say in these decisions. We urge the board to reconsider the proposed cuts. Preserving these positions is crucial for maintaining high educational standards and supports for our students and teachers. We are committed to collaborating on solutions that uphold the quality of education in our district. So please do reconsider. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maxie McLowan. I'm here today as a parent, an autism advocate, and a rare disease advocate. I'm sure you've received several emails from me this week, and I'm asking you if you could please go back and reread that. We are asking for a transfer request for our son to leave East Chapel Hill High and go to Carborough High. He attended there this summer and made significant progress with the teacher there. I have outlined and gone into great detail about our issues at East. David is not like any other student that you have in this school system. He has an ultra-rare syndrome, 1 in 100,000, and we are told that he may lose his vision at any point. So we are trying to get all that we can for him to be as independent as he can be and be the best citizen that he can be while he still has good vision. I did receive an email from Quenisha today, Quenisha Miller, stating that he did not qualify for extenuating circumstances. But the details that I outlined in that email and all of those emails, I think definitely show extenuating circumstances. So I'm asking you to go back and reconsider that. There are reasons why numerous parents are asking to transfer out of East. I would be happy to speak to any and all of you about those issues at any point if you wanted to contact me. We don't just make these things up. These are serious concerns, safety concerns about our children almost getting hit in a parking lot and almost getting to the main road due to lack of supervision. My child personally was almost hit by a bus numerous times last year due to lack of supervision. You know, before this turns tragic, please reach out to us as parents so we can talk to you about all of those issues. And again, if you'll go back and read my email, I've explained in great detail why this is so important for David, for this one student to do this transfer. Ms. Boylan has the room. She only has 4 students. She wants David in her class. She is excited about him being there. Other than not asking for a transfer request by, April 15th, there's no other reason why this shouldn't happen. It's in the best interest of this child. And the reason I didn't ask for a transfer sooner, David has such a rare syndrome. There's only one place in this country that has a center of excellence for that, and that's in Marshfield, Wisconsin. We just got back from there a few weeks ago. David had some testing done, and they said, "What happened this past year?" They said they didn't see the jump in academic skills that they had seen the 2 years prior. The main thing I told them is he did not have a certified teacher for the whole year. And before that, he had changed teachers 2 or 3 times. There's been a lot going on at East that needs to be looked at. So since he has not made the progress he needs, we are needing a change to a teacher who's excited and ready to teach him, to a class that has more verbal students. I have 2 doctor's letters stating that this is what we need, and I hope you'll consider our request. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. McGlon, Ms. McGlon, it's Dr. Griffin up here. I wanted you to acknowledge we have received your letters. They just came in the last 24 hours, and appreciate you being here tonight, and people will get back to you. Thank you. That's it? Is there anybody in the audience tonight that did not sign up to speak that would like to speak? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Carrie Hamill, and I will still this week forward a note that I provided, I think more than 4 years ago, asking that there be a financial review committee with community members established here in Chapel Hill, Carrboro. That was a recommendation that came out of Wayne County Schools as it had financial issues. And the number of school districts since that time have been many. And it's considered a best practice. And I asked, in light of this newest, rather surprised deficit and the timing of learning, the extent of it. Also, I asked that the board convene the policy committee in the next 2 meetings, that they look at putting together a timing requirement for RIFs. So there's a minority of school districts across the nation that have, when they do RIFs and these sort of matters, that the timing matters. It's not going to happen 3 business days before school starts, but rather it would be a spring. Also, I ask that you look at the professional development that is occurring, as well as the exodus, and really do a return on investment. I have certainly shared with you my concerns. This isn't a time for central office executives to be at mountain retreats in Colorado. Where folks are traveling out of county and out of state, it's time to look at it. As I sit here in knowing personally one of the best math teachers in this entire school district, we need coaches and we need supervision. I ask that all the school-facing cuts that you're looking at tonight not be approved by this board, and you go back to the drawing board with a financial review committee, with community members, and keep our schools intact. Thank you very much, and I'll forward that information.
Is there anybody else who's in the audience that did not sign up that would like to speak tonight? Okay, thank you all. That moves us to the next item, which is our consent agenda, and the chair requests a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved
I'll second.
and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
You're opposed? Yes. To approve the consent agenda?
Well, I'm not asking to take stuff off. I'm just voting.
Okay. So it was approved 6-1 with Ms. Fetters voting no. That takes us to discussion and action item tonight, which is approval of the reduction in force plan with recommendations for Board of Education consideration. And that's Dr. Hamlet, of course. And Dr. Hamlet, just to clarify again, during your presentation tonight, you would like us to interrupt at the topic you're on, or whoever's speaking, and so we could have a discussion and clarification. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So board members, if you need to ask something, just get her speaker's attention directly. You don't need to go through me.
All right, good afternoon or good evening, board, members of the public. Much of this presentation was shared last week, and so we noted in red font where there are brand new slides or where there were amendments to slides. Members of the public may have noticed that we were also making changes and reordering slides as late as this afternoon, and that was in response to some of the questions and concerns that I know board members received. So just wanted to state that before we get started. So this presentation actually is entitled Proposed Reduction in Force Plan, and a RIF is generally governmental jargon that we can describe this as reorganization or a restructuring. That's partly in response to our student enrollment today being about 1,000 students lower than it was pre-pandemic. The result of that is a corresponding loss of per pupil funding for each of those 1,000 kids. So in other words, we are a district of approximately 11,000 students, but the story we've been telling for 2 years is that we've been staffed as if we are still a district of more than 12,000 students. I left pretty much the presentation agenda the same and kind of just reordered it a bit from last week. But if it's okay with the board, I will just quickly go through the slides that we've already discussed and not go in detail. But please do stop me if you have questions. So again, what is a reduction in force? It's defined as a decrease in personnel positions within the district due to system reorganization, declining enrollment, financial exigency, or some combination of those factors. It is important to note that in our case, not all positions, actually none of the positions that we are looking to reduce will result in employee layoffs. And I think there's a distinction that needs to be made. Most of those eliminated positions or some of them are vacant in Tier 2. And others will be filled with employees who can be transferred or reassigned to fill vacancies within the district, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. I'll fly through these two slides. So the reduction in force is codified in policy 7920 for teachers and school administrators, talks about the specific criteria that needs to be determined when considering a reduction in force, and then 7921 for classified personnel who are impacted by a reduction in force. When it comes to the grounds for a reduction in force, there are three primary grounds when this is being considered. I talked about this last week: system reorganization, which includes the closing, consolidation, or reorganization of schools, school buildings, or facilities, or the merger of two schools or two school systems. And so there are a number of things that go into a system reorganization. But our primary reason here today, talking about declining enrollment, our school districts are funded based on average daily membership, and there's a per pupil formula that is utilized to come up with that funding allocation from the state. And then we talked about this also last week, when there is a significant decline in the board's financial resources for a number of years, as you know, and members of our public knows, our continuation budget has not been fully funded. So when you continue to offer human resources and material resources to a district, like you still have 12,300 students, both in the classroom and at the central office level, then there are adjustments that have to be made when you're considering not just declining resources, but also that declining enrollment. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Scott to share just briefly a few of the additional slides that we added in the budget section of this presentation. Again, for those who have noted that this is a surprise, perhaps untimely communication as it relates to impacted employees and having more definitive understanding of what employee or employee groups are being impacted. But this is a conversation that we've been having for over 2 years, and there are two examples of communication details that we've shared back on July 19th and again on August 16th that outlines the number of times that this board, the Board of County Commissioners, and school administration has shared what our financial situation is, and informing the public and our community that this is something that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And so here we are. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Scott so that he can go through the budget section and share with you some of the updates to that section.
Thank you, Dr. Hamlet. Good evening, board members, members of the public. Actually going to kind of briefly go over the presentation we gave a week ago, just to kind of give some context to this whole thing. And as Dr. Hamlet mentioned a minute ago, a lot of our funding comes from the state in a per pupil allotment. We receive about $8,500 per child in the state, or actually it's about $8,000. But when you have that reduction of 1,000 students, you know, our state allotments have dropped. And this just kind of outlines the average daily membership trends over the last 10 years. And you can see pre-pandemic, we were at 12,300, and we're projecting just over 11,000 children in 2024. So as Dr. Hamlet mentioned, we're about 1,200 kids less than we were last year, or I'm sorry, 2020. Wanted to talk about
Mr.
Oh,
Scott,
sorry, Dr.
while you're on talking about
Yep.
the decline in average daily membership at the state level, and maybe if you're going to get into it later, just tell me, I'll be quiet. It also impacts us at the local level because our budget is ADM approved as well by the county commissioners. And so if we have 1,000 fewer students, they may increase $200 per student, but the aggregate total amount is not going to be what we might need to keep paying salaries for everybody. That's correct, right?
Absolutely correct. I think
So it's not just state, when declining enrollment impacts us locally as well.
it does, it does.
Yeah.
Not to the same extent, but as we've talked about before, there are fixed costs that we have.
Right,
And, our electric bill is the same, buildings are the same.
regardless of how many
Regardless.
students are in them.
That's right. Right.
Right.
What it really does is as we decline in ADM, it drives up the per pupil number that they give us, but not the total.
Right.
So it actually is kind of a,
And we're actually more interested in the total at one level
That's right.
because we have fixed costs that are just going up. And so if the total's even less or equal to last year, it puts us behind, period.
yeah, that would be accurate.
And that's
Yes,
what's
sir.
going on.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question. I think you mentioned this at a previous board meeting, but just for the public's benefit, can you elaborate a little bit on why we might be seeing the kind of decline in enrollment? I feel like that's come up a lot in the community, people asking why that is, and I think it might provide a little helpful context.
Certainly. Without any definitive scientific data, we do know that our enrollments are decreasing at the elementary schools faster than they are at the high schools. And we've noticed a trend primarily with kindergarten enrollments that over time, the enrollments at the kindergarten level are dropping. And every year they get more significant drops. I would expect, and this is based on my opinion and not, study by anybody, but I would expect that it probably relates to the cost of real estate in Chapel Hill as opposed to surrounding areas, and that young families can no longer afford to live comfortably in this school district, and when there's real estate just over the county line that they can receive for significantly less and with a significantly less ad valorem tax associated with it. Just my opinion, we don't have the studies to back that up, but based on kindergarten and elementary enrollment, I would venture to postulate that that's probably the primary reason.
Thank you. No, thank you. I was just going to make the note that in addition to allotment and specific student-related funding, the state-level funding has also not kept up with inflation. So if you all can think about your homes, like the cost of energy has gone up 8 or 9% annually in some cases over the last couple of years, and we've not seen that increase. And so those costs, I think we talked about at a prior meeting, just the cost of transportation increased exponentially, and those costs have to be absorbed locally. We have to continue to serve students, but we're not getting funding coming in. And so at some point, that fund balance that we have, which I know you'll talk about, runs out, and that brings us to where we are.
We wanted, actually, that was a great lead-in for this slide. So we want to take a look over the last 3 or 4 years of operational spending for the local current expense fund. And at the same time, wanted to talk about fund balance a little bit because fund balance is always a topic that's top of everybody's mind. Wanted to just kind of define fund balance in a very easy to understand, easily digestible thing. And it essentially is the cash that we have in bank. I mean, there's a couple things that reconcile back and forth, but it basically reflects the operating cash that we have to do business year to year. Now, at the end of fiscal year 2021, the school district had just under $16 million in fund balance. I think that represented about 16% of local operating budget, provided about 2 months of operating cash in the event of emergency. It was great to have that money. We were in the middle of a pandemic. That money was used over the course of the last 3 years to retain and recruit staff, to combat the pandemic in a variety of ways. But just wanted to point that out, that fund balance is essentially a savings account. And the district was sitting with about 2 months' worth of expenses in 2021 in the savings account.
But it was also used to cover any unfunded portion of our continuation budget as well. And I think that, I want to keep driving home that point, that I appreciate the county's funding whenever it funds, but the continuation budget, meaning all the people who we employed, all the facilities that we operated in order to continue to pay the bills and employ all those people, if the county didn't fund our ask to fund any raises from the state and our match, we had to make up the difference with that 15 million over all these years.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep, absolutely correct.
thank you.
And as you can see, that started to take effect in 2022. At the same time, we weren't receiving any continuation increases from the county. So we broke even in 2021. For all intents and purposes, had a $100,000 loss. Consider that pretty much break even. Moving into fiscal year 2022, the district lost $3.5 million. Again, as you were talking about, the continuation budget went unfunded that year. The district absorbed all those costs at the encouragement of the county commissioners to spend down our fund balance. As a result, we went now in 2 years from 16 million to 12 million. In 2023, the district lost $6.5 million. Again, being asked by the county commissioners, instead of receiving a significant budget increase, to utilize our fund balance, bringing us down to just over $5.5 million. This is compounded moving forward. As we recovered from the pandemic, our vacancy fill rates increased, and last fiscal year we're projecting about a $5.6 million loss. Although it's not audited yet, that number is probably very, very close to what I expect the audit to come through with. And this is the most important part of this slide, is that the district in 4 years has gone from $16 million in the bank in operating cash to now actually owing $73,000. Yes, ma'am.
And during that time, we've maintained employment of all our employees to the best of our ability, all while decreasing enrollment in our schools, so less students that the staff is supporting.
That's correct.
Okay.
And maintaining all 19 schools that we have.
Maintaining all of our 19 schools that we've talked about.
I have a question. And as we've continued to maintain our employees and serving fewer students, we've also, or let me ask the question, I'm sorry. Have we reduced any programs since we've had fewer students in that same time frame that may have recouped some of those funds?
The only program I can remember that we have drawn down is the Virtual Learning Academy. There
That
may
was
be
this
something
But
that,
that was this year.
Right.
That was
And that
this
was
year.
as of June.
right,
I mean, in the prior years.
not that I'm aware of.
Jonathan?
Sir.
I also wanted to point out that in the 3 years you're discussing, the last 3 years, the board, as it spent down some of its fund balance, did it to raise the teacher supplement for the district. And that was one of the first things we did 3 years ago. And then we implemented, to the best of our ability, a major step in the classified employee pay scale. And again, we did that with full intent of drawing down those funds that the commissioners were putting constant pressure on us before they would approve our budget. At the request we made was to reduce that fund balance. They didn't like us carrying it. So that's what we did. And I would be remiss, I just want to point out last year when we had the transportation issues and the shortage of bus drivers, one of the proposals at the time was to change the start time of the schools so that we could accommodate bus routes better, and the district proposed and the board approved increasing bus driver salaries to the maximum, and that made a significant difference. And so the money we've been spending to do this compliance with the fund balance directives have been to support our employees and our staff. And I just want that out there. But we knew at some point if we didn't get the money here, we're going to be at this crossroads. Thanks.
You're welcome. So again, just to kind of sum this up, that's negative 73,000 is a pretty good analog for the amount of cash in bank we had at June 30th. To kind of talk about how we're funded, we get a county appropriation locally, which comes in 12 equal installments. And we also receive a special district tax, which is primarily collected in November, December, and January of every calendar year. That district tax is $30 million. It makes up about 45% of our local budget. In years past, we have not run into significant cash flow issues because, as you can see, we had enough cash in the bank to cover. At this point, we have talked to the county, but our expenses every month are going to outpace the amount of county appropriation we have coming in. Had we had $12 million in the bank, it's not a big deal, and we catch up in January. But closing the year with no money in the bank is going to create a cash flow issue for us going through probably December of this year. We have talked to the county staff. They're confident that they can stand behind us to help with the cash flow problem this year. But we need to understand that this is a problem that's going to compound. So if these cuts are not made, I fully anticipate us losing another $6 million next year. And if we just want to if the county wants to front us the cash, it doesn't get us out of the hole, right? And this hole is just going to get bigger and bigger. And if they could continue to front us the cash, that'd be great. But we're going to just be building a debt as we go along.
Jonathan, again,
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but take advantage of the moments. So Dr. Hamlet's plan and what we're all talking about here tonight and the reduction in staffing is to prevent a crisis and an emergency where next year we would literally just be laying off staff with no notice in order, because by law we have to balance our budget. We can't just say, oh, we're $6 million overdrawn next year or anything like that. So if this seems dire now, it's really going to be dire if we don't take action now.
I think it's actually dire right now because
Thank you.
we need to pass, we as a district and a board have to pass a balanced budget moving into next year. We know that we're operating in a $6.5 million deficit. I don't have the ability to bring you a budget that balances with all the expenses that we incurred last year. You as a board don't have the ability to appropriate fund balance that would allow me to bring you a budget that would absorb that $5.56 million. So you're correct, except I think that the direness is now, and not a year out.
Thank you for making that point.
And this is just a graphical representation of the fund balance over 12 years. You can see it kind of ebbs and flows over time. This is the lowest that it's been in the last 12 years. I do remember back fiscal year 2004, we were in a very similar situation that through very focused hiring freezes and very, very strong fiscal constraints, the board was able to replenish the fund balance. But I think that also came with a pretty significant increase to the special district tax at that time. But as you can see, we did dip during the Great Recession down below 5.5%. At that time, no employees were impacted, but we got down pretty significant at that time. So then this is, again, like what I was just alluding to, based on what we know right now. And I want to caution everyone, the board and the public, that right now we believe there's going to be a 3% raise, and that's what's legislated. We also know that we're going into a contested election season, not only locally, but also across the state and across the country. And we're not really sure what the General Assembly will do when they come back. And before they left, they did talk about an additional 2% increase. So that is out there. Could still happen. Probably not a high probability of it, but if that does, this deficit would go up. But with what we know right now, based on the amount of money we're going to receive in the increase of the special district tax, a 5% increase in our county appropriation, all other things being equal, with the corrective action plan that was implemented in April, we would anticipate having an additional $341,000 to put towards the deficit. So I want to be very careful with that. We're not anticipating a $341,000 surplus because we have a $5.6 million deficit. So based on these numbers, without any changes from the state, we need to make up at minimum let's just call it $5.3 million to be able to pass a budget that balances without the appropriation of fund balance. And that is where the design, not only the corrective action plan in April came from, but also tiers 2 and tiers 3 that we're proposing this evening. And at that, I believe we'll take any more questions and then turn it back over to Dr. Hamlet. Oh, I do, that's right, the 2 slides that are new. I'm sorry. So just for everyone's sake, we presented these a couple months ago, but I think it's important that we kind of look at how we're funded, how rich we are in human resources in this district, and how fortunate we are for what we have in our schools. As you can see, this is a breakdown of FTEs across the district based on job class and also based on source of funds. And the state accounts for about 53% of all of our FTEs, which are full-time equivalents or positions. So the state accounts for about 53%. Locally, the district provides 40% of the FTEs. That's very uncommon across the state. We have, as we mentioned before, we have the luxury of Orange County's county appropriation being one of the highest in the state, along with the special district tax that allows us to provide 747 FTEs locally. And then we broke them down as a percentage of the total budget. I know there's been a lot of talk about district administration and the percentage, the amount of people in the district administrators. Based on this slide, it accounts for 3.3% of the FTE across the district. Next slide is more of the same. It's just dollars instead of FTE. But as you can see, the state gives us $74 million for personnel. We spend just under $63 million locally on personnel, and the rest of it is across other miscellaneous grants. Anyone have any questions on that? Yes, sir.
So the local amount, the 40% is, and you said it's how many positions there?
746.9.
All right, so that's a lot of positions. I'm not getting into lecturing the community on anything, but our reality is we have way more in Chapel Hill Carborough schools than most school districts in North Carolina do. And using North Carolina as a standard is nothing to brag about. I get that. Trust me, I get that. But it's a significant undertaking here, and it's in personnel. And these local positions, this money that you've got up here, every time there's a salary increase for the state positions as well, our supplements have to be adjusted. All the supplements are paid out of local money. And so we have a competitive scale, and we try and stay competitive with it. So this is just not an insignificant, this is what makes Chapel Hill Carborough, Chapel Hill Carborough. And we've talked with the county commissioners about this. When people say, what's so different about you? It's this local funding, and it's that special district tax. And this money is spent for 140 some teacher assistants. We triple the state money in exceptional children. The state puts in X dollars, and we spend more than 3 times locally on that, and proudly do it. But that's what we do, because the state doesn't come close to spending money on the kids. We have programs in this district that no other district has as a result of this, but it's all in staff primarily. And so it's not going to be a simple thing to just leave everybody here in staff and cut some electric bill or some paper supply or a computer contract. That's important. And yes, we need to look at that. But you're really putting a lot of dollars right here in front of us. And I just want to say that over and over. Thank you.
I did want to jump on because you started talking about paper and all that stuff. 15% of our budget, Mr. Scott, roughly for non-personnel costs of our operating budget. 85% on people, 15% on everything else.
Right.
Includes, oh, there you go. You know, that's the electric bill, that's the gas for the buses and things like that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And we've looked at that in previous board meetings at the direction of the board. So no surprise there, it's been talked about, not just this year or 3 months ago. We've been talking about it since I've been on the board. Okay, so we've looked at that 15% very closely. And the vast majority of it is inflationary costs for risk management portfolio. So that's our insurance that we have to carry, and keeping the lights on, literally keeping the lights on. It's our electric bill. So your electric bills go up, so do ours at the school district, and we operate 19 facilities, and a lot of them are not very young. All right.
The question, so the policy on RIFs requires the board to explore, consider, and discuss a variety of ways to avoid a reduction in force, and only then are we supposed to move on the question of reducing force. And so Ms. Jenkins just kind of alluded to it, but like what else could we do? Like to act, I mean, yeah, what else could we do?
So from my perspective and in my opinion, you may be able to mitigate a little bit through strategic reductions, but given what we've experienced over the last few years, I personally believe that you don't have an option.
Okay, and by strategic reduction, you mean like not filling vacant spots, or what do you mean? I don't know what that
like
means.
lowering the temperature in
Oh, okay.
schoolrooms, doing without fiber optic cabling, trimming around the edges that will severely impact operations. There's just not, when you look at the contracted services and purchase of goods across the district, there's not enough to come close to $5.5 million without, severely impacting operations.
Okay.
All right, so I shared a little bit about this slide, or we did last week, but there were a number of considerations in the decision-making process that we went through as we spent hours and hours, combing through the human resources as well as some of those non-personnel expenses that Ms. Jenkins talked about. But this is not an exhaustive list, and you can see in the reduction in force plan more specifically. But we looked at, preserving student-facing positions to the maximum extent possible, which is why you see the Tier 2 cuts and outline the way that they are. Reducing redundancy, looking at seniority, performance, and a number of other things that we considered to include our racial equity decision-making protocol. Primarily the question, who will experience burden or benefit if we cut X position or this employee group. And then we also looked at unique skills and licensure, as well as necessity and looking at strategic plan impacts. So I've shared with my team, as we're redistributing departments, and I think I've said it in a board meeting, as certain positions are cut, there will be an impact. The work still has to get done. The work still has to get done on behalf of children. And so there will be an impact, whether that's on other departments within central services or whether that's at the school level, but there will be an impact. I think it's also important to note, and you can see the numbers here, what the impact of the proposed spending reduction will look like for each tier. But when we get to Tier 2, it does require immediate and significant cuts to central office and ancillary support roles. I know members of the public like to note how many central office employees there are. The reason that we also said ancillary services is because there are a number of positions that are considered Lincoln Center positions that are assigned in schools, that work full-time in schools, or perhaps transportation, for example. And as you saw on one of the previous slides, Lincoln Center accounts for approximately 3.3% of the FTEs or the positions in this district, yet the cuts account for over 40% of the overall reduction in personnel costs for the current fiscal year. So I just want to state that again. 3.3% of the total FTEs of the district, yet 40% of the personnel cuts. And despite the disproportionate burden placed on the roles in the current year, we do accept these sacrifices to protect direct classroom resources and to ensure the long-term stability of our district. I also want to note, I know that there were a number of comments, and I'm sure you've received emails, and there have also been board member questions about contracted services. When you look at the top 10 to 15 contracted services, it accounts for about $9.5 million. And I just want to run a list for you because these are things that I think the board and the public should consider and tell me what we can do without. The Bud Group, which is our custodial services. Chartwells or Compass Group, feeding children. EC Software, IEP Management and Medicaid, Printers and Copiers, Jordan Driver School, so driver's ed, high dosage tutoring at both the elementary and secondary level, school resource officers, IEP services like hearing impaired and visual services for students with disabilities, our visiting international faculty, security, custodial, and progress monitoring tools, which are two of the contracts that you approved this evening. So the top 10 to 15 or so contracted services are about $9.5 million. So I would love for feedback from the public on, and the board, if there are ideas that you have about ways in which we can minimize impact to operational services in our district. That's the top 10 to 15 list. So when it comes to the communication and decision-making timeline, as you know, at the August 15th meeting, we shared this information with you, just not in detail, but we shared it with you and the public and the tiered approach that we were hoping to take today. Of course, we are having this meeting and asking the board to take action. On August 6th, we shared with school and district leaders, more specifically, what the plan would be looking like. August 14th, shared more specifics with Lincoln Center and Cheryl Marr staff and had a question and answer period with them. All employees impacted by this were notified by the and provided the time and space to process and decide on their next steps, albeit not a lot of time. Not a lot of time, particularly our Tier 2 folks. We, as you know, froze a number of positions in schools. And I hate to use a harsh term, but we didn't want to continue to hold schools hostage and not allow them to hire external candidates that they were preparing to hire through their interview process. But we froze those positions because we wanted to do right by the people that we currently have in our district, and we wanted to leave space and opportunity for them to be reassigned rather than laid off. We also shared with those employees that none of this is final until the board approves the plan, and that it also included appeal hearings to which eligible certified or career status employees would be entitled to if they so choose. So recognizing that no timing is ideal and that discussions about potential changes have been ongoing for years, it's important to acknowledge the concerns and questions about the notification process. We understand that some employees first learned about the impact on their roles upon returning from summer break, and we regret that this was their first exposure to these changes that impact them directly. We were committed to ensuring that one-on-one and small group conversations took place before any major announcements were made, and to better support our employees to provide clarity before any finite decisions were made by the board, and that any broader communication occurred. So in other words, I shared with my team and our human resources department that I didn't want any employee group to see their position or their employee group listed in a board abstract without someone sitting down with them and having a face-to-face conversation with them first. Again, we do regret that we're at this juncture and it happens to be at the start of a school year. I absolutely wish we could be starting the school year in a different way. But we wanted to do our best with the situation that we have before us and do right by our people to the maximum extent possible. And I also want to just again speak to the questions about why employees were informed before the board making a decision tonight. So in part, it's about our schools needing to be able to fill positions that they still had vacant and were hoping to hire external candidates for. It is certainly about doing right by our people that are dedicated employees that have been supporting schools for some time, a long time. And it also has to do with the start of the school year and wanting to make sure that not only do we follow the policy and make sure that people have the opportunity to appeal before the board, but we also recognize that the plan itself would be, if you decide tonight, you would approve the plan, but the personnel impacts, meaning any demotions in pay or position or contracts, that would not take place until the board takes action or personnel action at the September 5th meeting. So I think I got a little bit ahead of myself. The transition of reassignments, we asked employees to report to those reassignments, again, recognizing that we have children coming before us on August 26th. We have the special call board meeting tonight, and then we propose, along with the appeal process that I just shared with you, that we, or the board, hold appeal hearings on September 3rd and 4th. For eligible certified or career status employees. And another part of that is discussing that tonight and getting consensus from the board, because the board must give employees at least 10 days notice of the hearing date for those appeal meetings. And those would be in person unless the employee agreed to have them virtual. But I know this board and I know you all would want to have those meetings in person as well.
I have a question, Dr. Hamlet.
Sure.
The top 10 or 15 areas that you spoke of just a few minutes ago, I want to go back, that you were saying that if those were things that we could do without, do we have a slide on those?
We don't, but I can share a report with the board or with the public.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
No, that was in response to questions about contracted services.
Okay, because I'd definitely be interested in, I know there are lots of people in our community that aren't so committed to the fact that we have school resource officers. So I would just like to look at that more. I mean, I know that that's not something that we currently had said, but I just would like to see, in terms of one of the things you were saying that we do or don't, as one of the things, to see what that cost is and how much we're spending with school resource officers.
Yeah, and I know as a community advocate prior to your time on the board, I know you were following the 2+ year conversation of this board about school resource officers, but I would like for you to share about the contracted services for SROs.
I'm retired law enforcement too, so I see both sides, but I know that there's been, so yeah, I'll let him go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, just for a point of clarification, the MOU that we currently have in place between both local law enforcement agencies in the towns of Carrboro and Chapel Hill, as well as financially working with Orange County, though technically we do pay for the police to be in our schools as school resource officers, it is fully reimbursed through the county, Orange County, 100%. So there's really no cost for the MOU, though we do have to front the money on the front end, and then we're reimbursed at the end of the year, just for clarification. But from a technical piece, it does go through our district on the front end, so it would be added to the list.
So I can just add for absolute clarity, the county encourages a nurse in every school and an SRO in middle and high schools. So they developed a what they call safe school funding formula between Orange County schools and Chapel Carrboro. The requirements of that are outside of the county appropriation. And as Mr. Shiroki just said, it's reimbursable after the fact. Those dollars cannot be used for anything other than, say, schools, so health and security.
So that would actually be one of the contracting services that really wouldn't be on that list. We wouldn't have any wiggle room there at all.
That's correct. I was just listing off the top 10 to 15.
No, that was just one that caught my mind because of what it was, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Mr. Scott, to say that again another way to make real clear, that does not impact our continuation budget request. It's a separate funding stream.
It does not, because the county appropriation has to be based per pupil according to state law. It was set up as a separate grant or separate funding source in order to provide one-for-one for both school districts.
Thank you.
Okay. Good to move on. Okay, so of course, we're here tonight for the special call meeting and asking that the board approve the recommendation for the reduction in force plan, and then hold the appeal hearings on September 3rd and 4th, which then would allow the board to take action on the personnel report at the regular meeting on September 5th. So as we get into the plan itself or the proposal, as we've shared before, this is a tiered approach. And I know that to some it may seem like a game of semantics, but a reduction in force is codified in both policy and general statute. And so that is the term that we are using, recognizing that this tiered approach is not necessarily how most districts approach this challenge. And the fact that most people define a reduction in force as and equate that to layoffs, and that's not entirely what's happening here, while still painful and difficult to work through. So I say that to say Tier 1 of this plan, we wanted to include our budget corrective action plan, which are actions that we already took in the spring. And those positions that we've shared, publicly, were primarily student-facing positions, as many recall. Let's not forget that this corrective action plan back in the spring also included a 5% across-the-board cut to Lincoln Center budgets. In addition, cost-saving measures included various areas such as travel, staff overtime, temporary employees, contract extensions, extra duty contracts, food, and purchasing. The spending limitations included approval requirements for essential out-of-state travel, restrictions on overnight stays at conferences within a 60-mile radius, and limitations on purchasing supplies for the next school year. We do recognize that there were some employees that were able to go to some conferences, and like I said, those were either through different funding sources, perhaps they were through grant funds or other sources, or at the time, we said that if there was anybody who was representing the district across the state or at the national level by presenting and representing Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools, that we would look at those and make exceptions in certain cases. Tier 2, I think I shared this last week, but of the 24 positions in Tier 2, 13 are vacant, and the remaining 11 impacted staff members were offered reassignments to other positions within the district. We gave each individual a few days to either accept the reassignment or choose to separate from the district in order to preserve as much planning and prep time for the employee, the schools, and human resources with transitions. So we did share that last week. When you look at the specific Tier 2 positions, student-facing positions are, like I said, protected to the maximum extent possible. So when we say Lincoln Center or Central Services, these are among the 24 cuts that are included in our recommendation. Our Chief of School Support and Wellness retired. The position is not being filled. Our Director of Mental Health and Wellness retired. That position is not being filled. We will no longer have a director of family and community engagement to support and engage our families and community partners through district-wide engagement that extends beyond the schools. The momentum we've gained in advancing our core value of social justice action and our commitment to instructional equity is at risk. This will directly affect the professional learning opportunities for our school and district leaders, teachers, equity coaches, and the culturally responsive teaching and learning cohort, leading to a reduction in these essential programs. Our communication staff is being cut by 40%, yet this is a community that continually expresses the need for transparent, timely, and open communication. The work of those who support the enrollment and education of our students impacted by homelessness must be shifted to another department and school-based staff. The list goes on. But as I stare at this list for another minute, I'm reminded of the caring and dedicated people, the people who we will no longer serve in these important roles. A colleague of ours recently got all of us reflecting on just who is, quote unquote, central office. She gave us permission to paraphrase this evening. They're not just some faceless strangers. They're the person who was once your student's favorite teacher. They're the person who's so aware of how bias impacts instruction that they were called to lead professional learning for everyone across the district. They're the people who tell stories for systems change so that every child has access to opportunity. They are Teachers of the Year, award-winning colleagues, and valued teammates who care every single day about doing something good for other people's children and for the staff that work with children every single day. If there's a silver lining, we have worked thoughtfully and in partnership with our schools to recommend and place people in open positions elsewhere in the district, and this will be our goal even as we move into Tier 3. With Tier 3, this has a more expanded timeline to allow for natural attrition to lessen the impact on staff. Allotment formulas will be adjusted in the spring, and staff will be offered alternative positions in lieu of reduction when possible. And this is made possible by the Tier 2 cuts, which will be effective immediately. I just want to reiterate that the Tier 3 reductions would take place through attrition, meaning as people retire or leave voluntarily, the positions would not be filled. So as the board discusses tonight, I think it's important to highlight, you'll notice that in Tier 3, there are items that are highlighted in green that indicate reductions where my team and I agreed that this is where we could start. There are also items highlighted in orange that represent reductions that we considered. When I say we attempted to turn over every rock, we've attempted to turn over every rock, and we've considered many, many more positions than what you see here. But the orange represent reductions considered by our team where there was disagreement or lack of consensus, but we still wanted to put that before the board because you may choose to discuss and consider non-consensus items that end up being included in the final plan, or you might decide to say, you know, take something out of Tier 2 or in the consensus of Tier 3 and replace it with this non-consensus item. So we wanted to give the board that ability and flexibility. So with Tier 3, there are, as you can notice, there are district-wide actions, and then we have elementary and secondary actions. And I'm just going to speak broadly here for all of the Tier 3. School counselors, instructional technology facilitators, instructional coaches are integral to delivering high-quality instruction and instructional support for our students. To be clear, although we have a little more time to work with impacted employee groups in Tier 3, all of these positions and the people in them contribute greatly. They contribute greatly to the success of our students and to the success of our schools. So don't think I necessarily need to go through every single line. I can speak to specific ones, or we can as a team if you have specific questions. I do want to clarify for Tier 3 secondary, there was a question asked about the school counselors. The plan calls for school counselors to be 10 months, with middle school having one 11-month counselor, and our high schools having one 12-month counselor, and everyone else being 11 months. Correct? 10 months. So I just wanted to provide that clarity that at each level there would be one counselor at the middle and high school at either 11 or 12 months, because I think that was a little confusing. So at this time, I will be quiet and open it up for the board for discussion or any additional questions that you may have.
Well, I'll just ask one question now, let it digest, and then let other board members discuss. Thank you so much for this work. This is tough. If we do nothing or don't, let's say we don't do Tier 3, what position? I know the answer, but I need us all to hear the answer, because I think we've been talking about this moment for years. So if we say we only want to do Tier 2, we don't want to do Tier 3, walk us down the worst case scenario, and we may need Eva to walk us down what could happen if we are not fiscally compliant.
Okay, so from just a math problem, so let's start there. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I'm going to do my best. But I believe the cap was about $2.3 million, and the Tier 2 was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.2 million. Yeah. So that's $4.5 million, and we have a $5.5 million gap, and we have no cash. So again, you can't balance or pass a budget that balances without reductions. So maybe a question for Eva, that may be a question for Eva. What would the board's options be at that point?
So state law states that each board
Eva, your mic.
State law does require each school board to operate under a balanced budget resolution, where the sum of net revenues and fund balance equals appropriations. And so, so that's your legal requirement right there. Does that answer that?
And if we don't comply, so if we say no, our values are, we value this and that.
So I think what you've heard is there will come a time when checks may bounce.
Oh, okay.
Paychecks would bounce.
And then worst case scenario, somebody could come and take over the district operations, right?
That's right.
I mean, we don't want to go that far, but it can get that far, right? So we're at a point where we have the opportunity to make decisions financially and get us on a better path. Right now, we're in the driver's seat.
And I would also be forced, as the finance officer for the district, I would be unable to issue a pre-audit on any purchase order, any disbursement of funds beyond payroll for the entire year, because I would not have the confidence that the funds exist in the budget to issue it, according to statute.
Right. So at this point, we have to make a decision. We have no choice. I want to keep driving that point in. We have no choice. This is not a perfect situation. No decision we make tonight is going to be good. It's going to feel not great for everyone, for those of us up here, and that's why I asked my fellow board members, let us make the decision. This is not going to be comfortable. We have to make it for our kids, for our children. So I just want us to remember that as board members, we have to make a decision. We're at that point. We can't keep saying, well, what about this and that? And we turn the thermostat down 2 degrees and maybe we say $50. We have to get us, because this is only going to get us, Mr. Scott, just breaking even this year. We got to talk about next year and the year after and the year after. So we're only getting us to this year, board members.
I'd like to respond. I agree that we have to do something. We do. And I think there is where we have the problem in terms of what to do. Yes, we do have the plan faced, and again, and I'll say my question still goes, and this is not to discredit any information that the administration has provided us. I think you guys have done as best as you could do in terms of giving us the information that we need, so it's no slight on that at all. My question still is, in terms of looking at it from a community member standpoint, how are we, as we've said, that there's going to be an impact in our schools. There's going to be impact felt in the district. My concern is that impact going to be felt more by our most vulnerable and most marginalized kids? And are those students going to have to continue to bear the burden of who didn't decide to be fiscally responsible 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or 10 years ago? I'm not saying it's this administration's fault what didn't happen then at all. I'm just trying to figure out how and in what capacity, what is it possible that we could try to figure out? And like I said, again, I say this is no slight to our current administration, because I do believe that our strategic plan is showing what the vision is and what the goals are. But as we're looking at situation, as you said, that our numbers are going down because we have people who are being priced out to live here. So people being priced out to live here does also increase homelessness and unhoused. And I know the Orange County Housing Emergency Hotline is jumping off, the hooks. So that means there are more students in need when it comes to that situation. So when we have situations where we're having to make cuts with student-facing positions that are in support and wellness and things of that nature, I'm still wondering, how is that not going to directly affect our most vulnerable and most marginalized students? That's where my burden is. Not that we can't or shouldn't do something. The fact that when we're having to take positions and move things to different departments under certain people, I want to know that when there's a student whose family needs them to have immediate services here, whether it's through social services or housing or what have you, I want to know that they know exactly who is going to have to answer to that when they pick up the phone, and that person, that's not just something added on to that person's job, because that means that person is already taking more. And I know that we do have to do that, and that's what teamwork is. But to me, there are certain things that really can't afford to be split among many, that you need to have a one centralized person and possibly a backup or two to know that this is what needs to happen. While those kids may be fewer than the vast majority in our district, we know that the children that are not the vast majority in the district are the ones who have had to bear the burden of getting the least in our district for way too long. That's where my problem comes.
So, right, I guess I am curious about how the racial impact or racial equity impact tool worked or didn't work in terms of what is on the list. And then also just what, if any, input did principals have in who is on tier 3? And then last is, I still am not sure I understand tier 3, despite having asked about it twice and read this abstract multiple times. And so it does seem to me like it has multiple components. One is a freeze if someone leaves. A second is a decision not to refill that. And then a third is to change the allotments. And it does seem, so I guess if you could just walk me through, if it would be possible to, it seems to me that if someone leaves, you don't have to do a RIF to still recover some of that salary. But so before I ask any more questions, I'll just let anybody respond to any of those three.
Would you want me to start with the last question or the first
Whatever.
question? Okay, so the racial equity decision-making protocol, as I mentioned, it's typically within that step 2 range where there's a question about who will experience burden or benefit if we cut said position. So when I look at the tier 2 list and we're talking about the groups of students and employees that I believe Ms. Feaster-Fordenville was just referring to, the ones that come top of mind for me are the mental health specialist, the federal programs coordinator, the equity specialist for instructional equity, the teacher on special assignment for the teacher of the year. We've been blessed and lucky to have 2 state teachers of the year in the last 3 or so years. What most people don't know is that in year 2 of that great honor, they have to spend about 80 days still traveling the state and out of the classroom. And so with our first teacher on special assignment, that was State Teacher of the Year, we brought her to central office and she did work with our equity team. So again, working in that space with our most marginalized, historically marginalized students and student groups. So our plan was to do the same with our Teacher of the Year that we have now, who will be on year 2. But so when I think about the racial equity decision-making protocol, those are the ones that I just listed are the ones that came top of mind for us as we were discussing it. Now, there were other positions and considerations that we moved off the table for the same reason as we went through the REDP. Your second question was about how principals were involved. So we met with principals a number of times throughout the last few years and actually had a conversation about this very thing last week. We shared with the principals that there was a very specific, and this is etched in my mind because I remember the principals getting in groups and we put a scenario in front of them. Not that we can predict the future, but we had a pretty good idea. As we said, we've been talking about this for 2 years. We put a scenario in front of them, put them in groups and said, you have to cut $5 million. Where would you start? And there were, ideas, brainstorming, arguments, debates. But we took that information and kept that top of mind as we were going through multiple iterations of this over the last couple of years. We also shared this and did the same type of scenario with our superintendent's, I usually say teacher cabinet, but school-based educator cabinet. We did the same thing with them, put a scenario in front of them, said you had to cut $5 million, and we left the room. We didn't want them to feel like, we were trying to sway their decision-making or their, recommendations one way or another. So we took the feedback from those groups over time to consider this list, both Tier 2 and Tier 3. Your last question was about...
Tier 3 and just the different aspects of it, the different components of it.
Yes, so Tier 3, I kind of consider it a combination between Tier 1 and Tier 2. Again, if we were not considering people and people's lives and, the challenges that this presents, then, and we were just looking at it as a math problem, then I would probably, and if we were in the private sector, I would probably be bringing you this plan and then some and saying it needs to be done right now. But notwithstanding that, our goal was to try to realize the savings through attrition. So as people separate, and I think you hit the nail on the head, it's kind of a 3-pronged approach. As people separate from the district that are in any of these employee groups in Tier 3, we would freeze the position. We would not allow the principal or the department to hire another employee in that position. And then in the spring, we do this anyway. We would adjust the allotment formulas, remove the positions, not the people, remove the positions from our allotments, And then anybody that's still left in the positions, if we still have, an overage based on the FTEs that we should have, then they would be offered a reassignment to other positions within the district, as were the Tier 2 people last week. Does that help to?
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you so much for all of the work and thinking about this. I will start with, I share all the frustrations that we hear from the community members about the options in front of us. Nobody wants to be here, right? I have 4 kids who are in the, 2 who graduated from the district, 2 who are still here. And I do this work because I care so deeply about the impacts, not only to them, but all of the children in our district. So I want to start with that. I also want to recognize that we hire a superintendent to make difficult decisions. And I'm grateful for the way your administration has kind of thoughtfully considered the options and the principles, like minimizing the impact to the classroom. When you first brought the Tier 1 option, I was opposed to the teaching assistant, and I will always fall on my sword for classroom cuts. But we have to do something, right? I want to echo what my board members are saying. And looking at the budget, that's my work is in corporate finance, and, I just understand the reality of hard choices. I also just want to appreciate that we are dealing with people, and the idea that you have taken the time to assess how we just not make cuts, but think about thoughtfully creating opportunities for staff to be reassigned. Even if it means a pay cut, it still means you have a job, which, I think is really important to have that thoughtful approach to people. And so none of this feels good. I'm going to highlight 2 areas, though, that I would like the board to consider taking off the list. And one of those is changing the counselors. I imagine that with all of the other work that's going to fall back onto the schools with some of these actions, that's going to be a position that's really going to need to have stability and support. And so I know that there's a lot of work that happens with planning over the summer, and it's $144,000. So I would love, as a starting position, to take that off. If it becomes critical, I would be open to considering maybe making it 11 months versus 10 months. But, I think that small amount, I'd offer that up to the board. And then the second one is the pre-K mental health specialist. I just don't think that we can, in this environment where we recognize there's so much issues that family and communities are dealing with, I would want us to make sure we're staying strong in the places where people are going to need that kind of support. So those are the 2 things I offer, and I recognize that I'm not really offering anything back, but, the total on that is, about $250,000. And so if the board is amenable to that, I'd like to ask that we take those out of the Tier 3 consideration.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, well, I just wanted to sort of piggyback off of that to segue into our next steps. So this is presented to us sort of as a menu of options, and they're green and orange, but what are we tasked with? Is if we have only the green ones, is that sufficient? Or if we decide to take some of the orange ones off, or if we take away a green one, we have to replace, like, what's our is there a number that we have to meet with this decision?
So it would be helpful if we could consider what would replace the $250,000 or $145,000, which is why we gave the options of the non-consensus, which is in orange. I mean, ultimately, our goal is certainly to break even, but to begin to build back fund balance. So if we take things off of the list without adding something back, then it's going to take longer for us to break even and then to build back fund balance.
Is green sufficient to break even?
Just about.
Just about, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of variance in attrition rates.
Yeah.
And staffing, so we tried to provide a fairly conservative estimate.
Right.
And provide a
Right.
bit of hedge because we don't want to be wrong.
Sure. And I also want to go to Marisa's point earlier that it's not enough to only think about this year as well, that we got to think about the cost for the following years and stuff. So probably it's to our benefit to do more than just break even. But okay.
May I make a procedural request, which is, because in the end, we're going to be looking for a motion of some sort, that as you're looking at items, if you could just keep track. I mean, I will also, but what you will be sort of working towards at the end is, for example, a motion to approve, tier 2 and 3, except for counselors or whatever. And so keeping track of what you're removing and what is staying on so that it can be included in the motion.
May I make just one statement? So about 2 years ago, we moved to mental health specialists in each of the schools. And so we have, by taking it down to 2, we took it down 2 positions, so we have 9. And what we're looking at doing is that the mental health specialists that are in elementary schools will also serve the pre-K that they're at. So some of that, the pre-K mental health specialists change is because we've actually changed the model in which we have mental health specialists in each school now. I just wanted to share that.
Does that make sense, Ronnie? So we had the pre-K mental health specialist before we had the full complement of mental health specialists K-12.
I appreciate that. I also wonder if, just given capacity of needs, that the elementary schools might need that full body themselves. And so I don't want to miss anything in that transition, since those are so critical developmental years.
Thank you very much for all the information. I want to echo what Ronnie was saying. This is painful for all of us up here, and I know it's painful for members of the public and certainly this impacted staff. So we recognize that these are real people and that they have real impacts. And so I want to acknowledge that. I also was interested in hearing a little bit more about that the proposed move of reducing the number of months for counselors. And also, I think there was reference to some assistant principals as well. So I don't know if Dr. Harris, if you would be the person to direct it to maybe, but just to talk a little bit about what that means practically a little bit so I could get a better sense of what duties might be impacted by making that change.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So our counselors do enormous work in individualizing schedules, services for students with the data that they have. And a lot of that work actually takes place during the summers. And so currently, our high schools have 11-month counselors and 1 12-month counselor. So that is the desired current layout of our high school counselors. Now, we have one school that in years past, we have not right-sized their counseling staff. And so they have more 12-month counselors than any other high school, and that was something that we wanted to right-size as well. In middle schools, our middle school counselors are 10.5 months, and then we have 1 11-month counselor. And so the impact on those counselors would be in middle school and high school, all of the counselors would be 10 months, and we would offer additional employment to 1 counselor in the middle school for scheduling, and then 1 counselor in the high school for scheduling, which is the current desire and design anyway. What we are proposing simply reduces the other counselors from 10.5 to 10 in middle school, and it reduces the high school counselors from 11 to 10. And so the additional months of work where they would have typically been serving students and scheduling students, that would go to the counselor that typically handles a majority of scheduling, but also that would cause the counselors to do additional work in the spring, as well as utilizing the assistant principals that may be there during the summer and working more in the spring to make sure that the student schedules are further along before we actually reach the summer months. In regards to assistant principals, excuse me, all of our schools currently have 12-month assistant principals across the board. So in elementary, we were recommending that they move to 11 months with the option of working summer school or different programs if the need arises. In middle school, we were reducing the allotments by one assistant principal. We're changing it basically to a size model. And so making sure that we are equitably staffing our schools by assistant principals. Instead of saying you have this number, we would look at the size of the schools, and I believe it is 725. I believe if a middle school is larger than 725, then we would reconsider their assistant principal size. And then for the high schools, we would be keeping those assistant principals as they are because we are taking away the testing coordinators. So we realized that those responsibilities would fall on the assistant principals, as well as some of the scheduling needs in the summer. The assistant principals may need to serve there as well. Yeah.
If I could just add to that, recognizing that these are contract length reductions, that doesn't mean that services and supports to students, staff, and families can't still happen in the summer. So we have the flexibility where working with school leaders, their time can be staggered throughout the school year. So, you know, there might be time that they're off in the fall or in the spring so that some of them can work a couple of weeks in the summer on a staggered basis. And that includes assistant principals as well, if their contracts are reduced. So it doesn't mean thou shalt take the month of July off, if that makes sense. The other thing I will say about the testing coordinator thing, the testing coordinators, as we talked a lot about how our continuation budget hadn't been funded in a number of years. Our high schools put forth testing coordinators in our expansion budget 2-3 years ago. And we didn't have our continuation budget funded, so we certainly didn't have our expansion budget funded. So they traded in other positions in order to create these testing coordinator positions. But that's a long way of me saying the testing coordinator work was done by assistant principals previously.
Would you guys please remind me, I know we talked about it, I'm just not remembering, I can't find it right this minute, what the different extra duty units and co-curricular duties of staff are? Or could be? I know it was a lot of different types of things.
So there's three primary types of extra duty. The board allocates activity units to elementary, middle, and high schools. They're allocated at a unit of $500 each and can be used at the discretion of the principals within the schools. I don't have the ratios in my head, but I think elementary schools get 5, middle schools get 25, and high schools get 50 or something like that. So that's one set. Okay. Additionally, co-curriculars, and so you have co-curriculars and athletics. Those are paid based on the type of activity or type of sport, and also at different levels based on years of experience. So 3 different things. One extra duty, activity units can be used for all types of things like, sure, yeah, Model UN, those type things. Co-curriculars are more of your drama, theater, newspaper, and then of course athletics, which isn't really part of the recommended cut. Okay. All of them though do, would be remiss if I didn't mention, you know, they all do affect, they are student facing and they provide additional activities for children outside the scope of the normal day.
Thank you.
So I was very struck by our first 2 public commenters, and they both were talking about, I think, touching in various ways on ITF. And I guess I think one of the very first votes I did on the school board was to vote against one-to-one iPads in kindergarten and first grade. And it was partly because of concern that they're just being used, not so much against them, but that they were not being used properly. And so I heard those folks sort of talking about the role that that position has in making sure that technology is used properly. And so I don't really, I guess I am a little bit reluctant to second guess you all. I mean, you are the experts here, but I guess it just would help me in terms of thinking about a green for an orange or anything to understand that role in particular, because it does seem to be one of the bigger ticket items, I think, right? Okay.
Yeah, so as we talk about the reduction of the FTEs for ITFs, and there's a lot of acronyms here, and not just the ITFs, but also our instructional coaches. One of the things that you guys have heard me say time and time again is I believe in doing things to the maximum extent possible with people rather than to them or for them. So if the board were to approve this part of the plan, then we would work with our ITFs to determine what services and supports that are currently provided to teachers and students that would be tremendously impacted. They do way more than just helping with technical issues or, signing into a Chromebook. They help with the instructional practices that are centered around the proper use of technology in the classrooms, not just with teachers and coaching teachers on best practices and modeling for teachers in the classroom on best practices, but they also do that in working directly with students in those situations. So it's more than just the technical side of the work and helping with resetting passwords. And I know this board likes to hear directly from the true boots on the ground and experts, and I hate to put anybody on the spot, but if there are any ITFs still here who would like to speak to anything else, I'm happy to lend the mic.
I'm an ITF.
Come on up.
At Sewell, we tried to outline this on very short notice in the letter that we sent to you guys today. I'm Jill Grantham, by the way. But it is a critical role. I mean, I get very emotional about it, but if, I'm at one of the schools that is one of the smart display schools, and I mean, if you guys had the opportunity to be there just in the few days that we've been back, I mean, it is tremendous what we do every day for teachers. And it is way beyond technical. I mean, we are helping teachers with skills that they are in turn working with children that are like the future of our kids. And taking this away from the elementary is, when you're putting so much money into this technology, is going to be really challenging. And to try to support multiple schools is very limiting when you're talking about the type of collaboration that we do with teachers, the type of expertise that we have. We all have, most all of us have certifications or advanced degrees that are required for this particular position, and so with all due respect, shifting us to a different position, while it is a decrease in pay, it is not the same as why we moved our families here and why we came to this district, who is the leader in the state in providing this type of opportunity for our kids, and allows us to provide a lot of robotics and equitable access to our students in a school setting. And I don't know if everybody had a chance to read the letter, but it is just a crucial role. And I know every role is crucial for our kids, and we get the financial problem, and that there has to be somebody, but it is a hard thing to manage what, initiatives we're taking on that you guys are providing for us with such a limited amount of people. And so, that's kind of why we came here. And the second part of this for us is, we had the opportunity to eliminate these 8 positions through attrition already in the last 2 years. So if this was a plan for several years, we've had 4 people retire. We've had 4 people that have left for other opportunities. We had the opportunity not to displace somebody in a different job, and that foresight wasn't, for whatever reason, on the table for us. But I appreciate you guys thinking about, the piece of adding all of this technology and, you know, artificial intelligence, all these things that are coming our way every single day and every month and every year, and all the equipment and how we utilize that in a productive way for students. And not having that is really, I think, a detriment, because teachers are learning from us. You know, they are learning and they have trust, and we're building relationships, and it's just a vital role.
I do want to say, I know that every employee group who is impacted doesn't get the same opportunity to express, you know, how meaningful their role and the work that they do is to the district. But I also recognize that the board tends to want to hear directly from the people who are being impacted and what that work looks like. So I apologize if I went off script a little bit, but Ms. Jenkins.
Yeah, that comment, it was in my notes to say this. You know, we've been talking about this issue for a couple of years, and every time we would try to consider where are we going to cut, what are we going to do, we've received immense pushback. So we've had opportunities over the years to make these tough decisions, and we just didn't. You know, Ronnie, I appreciate you saying, let's take this off the table, and I keep looking at the orange to see, can I find $250,000, and I can't. And as much as I'd like to say, yeah, let me join you, it's like, okay, well, then we might have to, you know, if we can't find the 250 there, then it's like, okay, well, then let's look at like a tier 3.1 that doesn't exist, and then we're going to start impacting those values that we said, student-facing, impacting the most vulnerable. Then it's going to really start to be that pain point that we don't want to touch. So there's no 3.1 or anything else. We are at, for me, the tier 3, and I know it hurts, right? And I'm like looking like, let me find 250. I agree with you, Ronnie. Yeah, let me find it, and I don't see it.
And Ms. Jenkins, you just said something that made me think about what was just said also. I don't want to misrepresent what I say when I say that this is something we've been discussing for 2 years. This isn't some plan with this that we've had in our back pockets for 2 years that we just whipped out today. When I say that we've been talking about this day coming, it's not the specific positions and, you know, the various tiered approach. Like, that's not what we've known or been talking about for 2 years. We've known that we've had to do something. The county commissioners have said that we need to tighten up our belts on our own first, right? So as we've been talking about this tiered approach, that is something that has been developed over the last couple of months.
Agreed, 100%. I mean, I think for me, chairing at Finance, Facility, and Operation, we've seen it from a dollar perspective, not a plan perspective. And whenever we've talked about our finances, and I am going to take a little liberties here, the immediate community response is Lincoln Center, right? Central office. And tonight we've heard these are critical roles. Like, you know, we can sit here and talk about it, and I think there's a lot of misrepresentations that keep parroted and repeated and rinsed and repeated over and over again about Lincoln Center. And the reality is there's some factual missteps about how staffing started when they start quoting those numbers, I think, and you tried to highlight it here. But I think we've tried to have this conversation and we've gotten pushback. We've said we need to probably look at doing some changes. And as soon as we start talking about it or hint at it as a board, immediately we get bombarded with no, don't touch anything. And I get it. I love Chapel Hill Harbor City Schools. All my kids have gone here since they started school. But this is the reality. We're here. And so this is where we've had to now finally put positions, dollars to what the picture is that we've been seeing that's been painted publicly in committee, publicly in board meetings. And now we actually have to make a decision. And we can't wait. And the timing isn't perfect, but it's because we've been trying to wait and hope then maybe the state will behave better towards public education. And maybe our continuation budget and expansion budgets will be funded by the county. And magically, money will appear and students will appear too. And none of those things have come to fruition. And so, I don't think we have any, for me, I don't have any other questions. I keep looking at the orange. I keep reading, it's tough. We know the people behind these positions. They're working with our kids. But for me as a board member, this is the tough decision.
Yeah, thanks for that. I will note that some of what we're looking at in these numbers are based on assumptions. So what I'm trying to kind of guide us to think about is like, these are longer-term decisions that we have for Tier 3. So as we start to think about the annual savings that come from some of these things, it gets us there. And we've made some assumptions about attrition in the year to give us the year's impact. But I'm thinking longer-term, what we're trying to do is build up. So I want to caution us to balance, like, definitely appreciate the necessity and the priority of rebuilding fund balance. So that's the number one principle. But also, like, is there an opportunity to say, can we pause on these two positions, these two categories, looking at the longer term of, the Tier 3 comes to about, somewhere between $3 and $4 million. Which is what we need to start building up fund balance, but it just gives us more time to see if there's anything else to get us there. So, again, happy to talk about, like, if we feel like we have to have the offsets today, we can have that discussion, but that's kind of where I'm starting.
Ronnie, to be clear, which two were you referencing?
The counselors and the pre-K mental health specialists.
Other questions?
I have a question about the testing coordinators at the high school level. Are any of those vacant currently?
I think one is vacant right now.
So if, hypothetically, if that was moved from, the vacant one was moved from Tier 3 to 2, that one could be frozen and that could be recapped, could be absorbed now, or am I misunderstanding how that could work?
So technically, at this point, the position's frozen.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe if you look at the tier for testing coordinators, we've already accounted for that position. Sorry. My eyes are getting terrible.
Look at this.
Thank you. Yeah, I can. Okay, so if one of those is vacant, that position would be vacant for the year, and it would net an $85,000 cost savings. That vacancy must have just occurred. Yep. So essentially, if it's vacant now, it's the same as being in Tier 2, if all three tiers are approved tonight.
That's what I was asking, if that was actually technically money newly found, so to speak. So that's 85. Okay.
Move over to the right. It would move over to the right column, correct? Mm-hmm. So we'd see 85,000 over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
And that's the case for Tier, and that's why we're saying, like, this year gives us kind of that runway, because there might be people that, separate from the district tomorrow. There might be people that separate from the district in May. So that gives us time to work through attrition and then adjusting the staffing formula in the spring.
Jonathan, I just want to make sure, though, this assumption is with the potential additional 3% raise from the state factored into this?
No, we used, because the loss, we're trying to meet the loss. We did not include the 3% in the costs. The cost you're seeing here, and I think, I didn't mention this in the presentation, but they are fully baked costs for 2024 to include salaries, matching benefits, and about $8,000 health insurance match. That's why the numbers appear larger than what people are actually making.
Okay.
But because the gap was set in 2024 fiscal dollars, when this was developed, we used 2024 salaries.
But if the state comes in and does an additional raise,
Then the conversation is going to be very, very different. I can't remember the number that the 2% was off the top of my head, but I want to say it was like 1.5 million. Then you would either have to make, again, in order to balance, some of these tier 3 things would have to become immediate. And that would really be the only choice that we would have.
yeah, and that's where I hesitate about taking things off for me. I mean, optimistically, I would love more raises for our staff. Always, always, always. But there's a tough balancing act as we try to get our staff paid to the level of professionals that they deserve to be paid. And so that's why I'm coming back to it. I really hesitate because it's an election year and people will do things for votes. I mean, and we don't know. And if we put ourselves in a position, we're going to be even worse, where then we're going to have to pull all this stuff back. I'd rather us go ahead and hold to what's here.
Okay, Meredith, and then I want to bring some closure to what we need to do.
Sure. I just was going to ask, and I think I've asked this question multiple times at multiple meetings, but I really think it's an important point. When that wasn't fully addressed is about this 3% raise. So 60% is paid for by the state of our employees, 40% locally, right? So if that 3% comes through, the 60% is covered by that 3%. But we get into trouble because we have so many employees that are paid with local funds that the state is not providing that 3% for. So I just wanted to, that's correct, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And we supplement additional so that we
Right.
can be some of the highest paid in the state and in the triangle. We also, those whose salaries are paid based on state allocations or state funding, there's also a local supplement that's on top of that. So it's both and.
So that actually, you'll see it in budget season when Orange County Schools presents their continuation budget and we present ours. Our per pupil continuation costs are significantly higher than Orange County Schools because of the additional people as well as the higher supplements that we pay. So that's always a point of conversation of the difference in the continuing costs between the two districts.
Okay, so I wanted to, and I'm talking to my colleagues on the board here for a second, take the temperature of the board, to use a phrase that I sometimes use. We have been presented a request, and I'm looking at the recommendation in the bottom of the abstract, to approve this reduction in force plan, which includes Tier 1, 2, and 3. And albeit Tier 1 has already been implemented at parts of Tier 2. But that was where we started tonight. And then there's been discussion about perhaps modifying that. But my first question, I just ask each of you, if you could indicate, can you just say where you are on supporting just the blanket recommendation for approving this plan with no additions or subtractions at this point? Just give me a sense.
I would support it as written.
Okay.
I would reluctantly support it as written.
Okay.
I would like to continue to encourage the board to consider those two, the pre-K mental health specialist. You know, we've had conversation after conversation about the importance of mental health. It's $119,000. It feels short-sighted to make a decision based on assumptions and take that position out. And I can tell you how overburdened school counselors are today. It is not an easy job. Students have not, don't have access to meet with them. They don't have capacity to handle the loads they have. We should be getting more funding from the state for this. It doesn't happen. So I would just be entirely uncomfortable making that cut to those counselors, just thinking about the real world work that's going to fall on their plates with some of the other cuts that are being made.
Okay. Teresa?
Ronnie, I hear you. I'm going to have to support the plan as stated.
Vicki?
I would prefer that there be some changes to some of the positions in Tier 2 to possibly be moved to Tier 3 in order to support the plan.
Yeah, I don't want to vote on tier 3 at all. And I don't think we have to. I think we could do it in 3 weeks and I would feel a lot more comfortable. I mean, I feel like I just learned tonight about what some of this stuff is and the significance of it. And I feel like I don't know what would happen between now and the next board meeting that would put us into receivership. So that's where I am.
And just so I heard you clearly, you said you don't want to
And just do like
support anything.
an amended motion to just have us vote on what.
On the floor.
Right, if you were gonna, right. Right, I would rather not vote on tier, I'm not saying I don't ever want to vote on tier 3, I do, but I just don't want to do it right now. But I recognize that's a minority view.
All right. So we have, 3 people that are supporting the plan as is, and we have 3 that would like to amend it in some way. And, I guess that's where we are. Mine is to support the plan, just because we need to keep moving forward. But I also, I do it with reluctance in the sense that the other points are valid. No question about it, the concerns. So with that said, can we entertain a motion and a possible second? You want to make another comment? Sure.
Yeah, we're in the second year of our budget cycle, correct? So the state will come up with the new budget cycle, again, with new raises. So anything that we leave in our budget for continuation would be up for any increases subject to county commissioner funding, fully funding of the continuation, correct?
That is just correct.
Okay.
We likely won't know that until April of next year.
Right.
And George, I'd like to say before we entertain a motion to go further, even from where Ronnie was saying, in terms of the mental health specialists and the climate of mental health right now, with the fact that we lost the director of, the chief of, okay, my computer's going down, of school, and we lost the director, we're losing the director of family community engagement, we're losing, the mental health specialist, and all of these things on top, as you're saying, the counselors are already overwhelmed and can't do enough. So if we have that put in place, and I'll still move to say, with the most vulnerable students, when we're talking about the ones who are possibly in foster care, the ones who may be unhoused, if we already have all of that being done by counselors, and then we still take away the federal programs person, where's that safety net? There's so many positions for truly at-risk young people, and so that's what I would think that the federal programs coordinator position would be better suited to at least go to tier 3 for us to try to figure out a plan of what to do with those job duties prior to that one job just being swooped. I mean, it's almost as if multiple positions could be, I don't know, but yeah, that's my issue there.
Okay, so what the chair would request is a motion that is stated in the abstract to get us moving here, that we approve the recommended reduction in force plan as outlined in the abstract and attachment.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? I guess we'll do a roll call vote just to be clear. Mike, we'll start with you and just move across the table.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
So the motion carries 4-3 as written in the abstract. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to our last item for the night, which is committee reports and sharing. I know it's only been a week since we met. Are there any committee reports tonight or anything board members need to add? Ronnie, did something? Okay. Giving Ms. Dossie a chance to check her notes here on updates for us. No hurry.
I'll just speak from memory and maybe ask Al to help chime in. We attended the Bond Education Committee this week, and we received a presentation from the firm that has been selected to support some of the communication around education on the Bond Committee. We have to move pretty quickly. Mail-in voting starts, I think, September 5th or 7th. And then the mail-in voting, and then early voting starts October 15th. And so we've got to get the messaging out. We're really trying to be intentional about reaching underrepresented groups and making sure that folks understand the why for the bond. Al, is there anything else in that? I think I got it all. Okay. We're going to be probably also scheduling, we'll have bi-monthly meetings, probably schedule some meetings in between to make sure we're keeping the ball rolling.
Thank you, Ronnie. Anybody else? The meeting is adjourned.